There are certain evenings when the human heart grows unbearably still, not because love has vanished, but because it waits in silence, hoping not to be misread. And if these words somehow reached you today, perhaps a part of your soul is already worn out from pretending you no longer feel anything, while another part still quietly hopes that someone, somewhere, is holding on to you just as firmly. Because the truth is, someone loves you far more profoundly than you recognize. Not in the loud theatrical way films so often depict love. Not through ideal timing or flawless language, but through hesitation, through emotional uncertainty, through distance that conceals fear rather than indifference. And before you persuade yourself to walk away for good, you need to grasp something most people discover far too late. Some hearts do not stop loving you when they go quiet. Sometimes silence is simply the final shield of a soul, terrified of losing what it cannot fully put into words. Human beings are peculiar when it comes to love, especially when love becomes genuine. We spend our whole lives believing we want deep emotional connection. Yet the instant someone truly touches the hidden corners of us, fear begins to stir. Carl Jung once spoke of the unconscious mind as a concealed ocean beneath human behavior. And when someone sincerely loves you, they do not merely graze your surface personality. They accidentally awaken the abandoned fragments buried far beneath it. Your insecurities, your unmet desires, your loneliness, your yearning to finally be chosen without conditions. That kind of bond changes people. It shakes them from within. It exposes emotional wounds they spent years concealing from themselves. This is why someone can love you deeply and still pull away at the precise moment you need reassurance most. It feels contradictory, but psychologically it makes complete sense. Love is not only warmth, love is exposure. Love is vulnerability. Standing bare before another human being and hoping they will not use your tenderness against you. And many people were never shown how to survive emotional intimacy. They learned how to endure disappointment. They learned how to appear strong. They learned how to suppress what they felt. But they never learned how to safely receive love without fear. So when this person became emotionally attached to you, something within them began shifting in ways they could not entirely explain. Your presence began affecting their emotional state. Your silence suddenly carried weight. Your attention became emotionally grounding. Your absence grew heavier than they had anticipated, and that frightened them. Because once someone gains the power to emotionally influence your inner world, your subconscious immediately registers risk. Suddenly losing them becomes conceivable. Suddenly abandonment feels imaginable once more. Suddenly your carefully guarded independence no longer feels secure. Many people mistake emotional distance for lack of love, but often emotional distance is actually a sign of emotional overwhelm. There are people who grow cold because they do not care, and there are others who grow distant because they care too deeply. The second type is far harder to understand because their behavior contradicts their emotions. Their heart moves toward you, while their fear pulls them in the opposite direction. One part of them desires closeness. Another part whispers, "What if this ends the way everything else has ended?" And without realizing it, they begin shielding themselves from pain that has not even arrived yet. Maybe you have already felt this contradiction yourself. The puzzling inconsistency, the emotional warmth followed by silence, the way they look at you when they believe you are not watching, the way they recall small details about you without effort, the emotional tension that lingers even in everyday conversations. And yet, something still feels obstructed, something left unfinished. It is almost as though their soul keeps leaning toward you, while their mind keeps stepping back. This is what unresolved emotional wounds frequently look like. People imagine trauma as dramatic destruction. But most emotional wounds are far quieter than that. They conceal themselves inside attachment patterns, inside fear of vulnerability, inside emotional withdrawal. Some people vanish emotionally the moment they begin caring deeply, because closeness unconsciously reminds them of pain they never healed from. Perhaps they once loved someone who left them behind. Perhaps they learned as children that expressing emotions led to rejection. Perhaps vulnerability once humiliated them so thoroughly that their nervous system now treats intimacy as a threat. And the heartbreaking reality is this: they may not even consciously understand why they are behaving this way. The subconscious mind governs far more behavior than people acknowledge. A person can genuinely love you while simultaneously undermining connection, because internally their nervous system associates love with emotional risk. They want closeness, but closeness triggers fear. They crave intimacy, but intimacy arouses vulnerability. So they begin sending mixed signals without even comprehending themselves. This is why emotionally mature love demands patience far more than passion. Passion is effortless. Anyone can desire someone intensely for a brief moment. But true love asks something far more difficult from human beings. It asks them to remove emotional armor layer by layer. It asks them to trust again after being let down. It asks them to remain emotionally open despite uncertainty. And for many people, that process feels overwhelming because they have spent years constructing identities around emotional self-protection. You must also understand something vital about silence. Silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes silence is emotional processing unfolding beneath the surface. Some people express their emotions immediately. Others withdraw inwardly when emotions become too intense. They retreat into thought, into confusion, into internal conflict, especially those who have spent their lives suppressing vulnerability. Their silence is not always a form of punishment. Sometimes it is emotional survival, but this creates painful misunderstandings in relationships. One person reads silence as rejection, while the other experiences it as protection. One feels abandoned, while the other feels emotionally overwhelmed. And gradually two people who deeply care for one another begin drifting apart. Not because love faded, but because fear grew louder than communication. This is where many people surrender too soon. They confuse emotional complexity with emotional absence. They assume love should always appear obvious, consistent, and uncomplicated. But psychologically, profound connections are rarely straightforward. They activate the deepest layers of human identity. They force people to confront their shadow selves, the insecure, wounded, frightened parts concealed beneath confidence and pride. Carl Jung believed that real love often functions as a mirror, not merely a source of comfort, but a reflection of the unresolved self. And this is why certain connections feel spiritually charged. They prompt emotional awakening. They reveal patterns you never noticed before. They surface your fear of abandonment, your tendency to overgive, your fear of being unworthy, your desperate need for reassurance, your hidden loneliness. Suddenly, another human being unknowingly becomes linked to parts of your identity you did not realize were still wounded. This person may be experiencing that very same internal chaos right now. They may lie awake replaying conversations with you at night, while pretending during the day that everything is fine. They may resist the urge to message you, because emotional pride keeps getting in the way. They may miss you profoundly, while convincing themselves that distance is necessary. And perhaps, the saddest element of human psychology is this: people often wound the ones they love most, because those are the only people truly capable of hurting them in return. That realization shifts everything when you begin seeing people through a psychological lens, rather than a purely emotional one. Because suddenly, you stop interpreting every confusing behavior as a lack of love. You begin recognizing emotional defense mechanisms hidden beneath actions. The delayed replies, the emotional inconsistency, the moments of withdrawal following intimacy, the fear concealed inside emotional restraint. None of these behaviors are healthy when left unaddressed, but they are deeply human. And perhaps this is the painful truth your soul needed to hear today. Not every emotionally withdrawn person is emotionally hollow. Some are simply emotionally drained from surviving life with a guarded heart. There are people moving through the world carrying years of silent grief that nobody ever acknowledged. People who learned to appear emotionally self-sufficient because depending on others once shattered them. People who secretly long for tenderness but feel overwhelmed the moment they receive it consistently. People who have forgotten how to trust steady love because instability became familiar to them. If this person truly loves you, their inner battle may run far deeper than you can currently perceive. But there is another side of this truth you must not overlook. Love alone is not sufficient without emotional growth. You cannot rescue someone from their own unconscious patterns if they refuse to confront themselves. You cannot endlessly sacrifice your emotional well-being, hoping your love will heal another person's fear. Real connection requires mutual emotional responsibility. Compassion matters, yes, but so does self-respect. Understanding someone's wounds should never mean abandoning your own emotional needs entirely. This is where emotional maturity becomes essential. Emotionally mature love does not beg for scraps. It does not destroy itself trying to prove its worthiness. It does not chase relentlessly while surrendering dignity. Mature love understands patience without self-abandonment. It creates space without disappearing emotionally. It allows compassion without dissolving boundaries. And sometimes the greatest expression of love is not forcing connection, but allowing someone the emotional room to confront themselves honestly. Because transformation cannot be directed from the outside. A person changes only when their soul grows weary of repeating the same emotional cycles. Perhaps this connection entered your life not only to bring you love, but to awaken you psychologically, to teach you the distinction between attachment and genuine emotional alignment, to reveal how deeply you crave emotional reciprocity, to compel you to face the ways you have dismissed your own intuition out of fear of losing someone. Reflect on this carefully. Have there been moments when your intuition quietly whispered the truth long before your mind was willing to accept it? Moments where you sensed their feelings beneath their spoken words? Human beings are far more intuitive than they recognize. The subconscious constantly reads emotional energy, body language, emotional shifts, patterns of silence, eye contact, nervous tension. Long before logic arrives, the soul often already understands. That is why certain people remain emotionally unforgettable. Not because they were flawless, but because they emotionally stirred something that had long been dormant inside you, and awakening is rarely comfortable. Sometimes it comes through longing, through confusion, through emotional distance that forces inward reflection, through missing someone so intensely that you finally confront the loneliness you had been avoiding. Pain carries a strange psychological function. It strips away illusions. It reveals emotional truth. It exposes where healing is still needed. This is why some relationships completely reshape your inner world, even when they never become fully stable on the outside. They force growth. They force awareness. They force emotional evolution. And perhaps this person is currently standing at the edge of that very transformation. Maybe they are slowly realizing that emotional avoidance no longer protects them the way it once did. Maybe your absence has compelled them to confront feelings they attempted to suppress. Maybe they are beginning to understand that real love cannot endure indefinitely within silence and pride. Because eventually every human being reaches a point where loneliness grows heavier than vulnerability. And when that moment comes, people begin to change. Not instantly, not without imperfection, but gradually. They begin recognizing the emotional walls they constructed around themselves. They start noticing how often fear shaped their choices. They realize how many opportunities for genuine connection they undermined, while trying to shield themselves from pain. And for the first time, they begin understanding that emotional safety cannot exist without emotional openness. This realization is life-altering. But while they navigate their own awakening, you must continue navigating yours. Do not allow uncertainty to erode your sense of self-worth. Do not let another person's emotional confusion persuade you that you are difficult to love. The way someone responds to intimacy often reflects their relationship with themselves far more than your value as a human being. Ride that again. Internally, Many emotionally unavailable people are not withholding love because you are unworthy. They are withholding because they themselves are afraid, terrified of needing someone, terrified of emotional dependency, terrified of rejection, terrified of losing control, terrified of being emotionally seen too clearly. And paradoxically, the more deeply they love, the more exposed they feel. This creates internal contradiction. They long for closeness while resisting it at the same time. And unless they consciously heal, they remain caught between desire and fear. But you cannot carry the emotional weight for two souls. You can love someone deeply and still choose emotional balance. You can understand someone psychologically without tolerating endless emotional inconsistency. Compassion should never become self-destruction. This is among the most essential lessons that emotionally awakened people eventually come to understand. Love should expand your spirit, not slowly erase it. And yet, despite all this complexity, there are still connections worth holding on to. Rare connections where two souls gradually come to know each other's fears with tenderness rather than judgment. Connections where emotional walls quietly soften over time. Connections where both people choose healing over ego. These relationships do exist, but they require honesty, accountability, vulnerability, patience, and emotional courage. Most importantly, they require two people willing to stop fleeing from themselves, because every relationship ultimately becomes a confrontation with the self. You cannot truly love another person while remaining completely disconnected from your own emotional truth. That is why shadow work matters. Shadow work is not simply spiritual language. Psychologically, it means honestly facing the hidden parts of yourself, the jealousy you deny, the fear you conceal, the loneliness you distract yourself from, the emotional patterns you repeat without awareness, the wounds you pretend no longer affect you. Until people confront these buried layers, relationships continue replaying the same pain in different forms. Perhaps this person is finally beginning to face their shadow because of you. Perhaps your love grew too real to dismiss, too emotionally honest, too psychologically awakening. And even if they have not fully sorted themselves out yet, something within them recognizes that this connection matters. Human beings do not struggle this deeply emotionally over people who mean nothing to them. Real emotional conflict only arises where genuine attachment exists. That is why indifference feels cold and uncomplicated, while love feels layered and emotionally alive. If someone truly does not care, their energy becomes emotionally flat. But when someone loves you deeply while wrestling with inner fear, their energy becomes unpredictable, emotionally charged, confusing, and intense. You sense their internal conflict even when words are absent. You have likely already felt this, the emotional pull, the sense of something unfinished, the quiet intuitive, knowing that beneath all the silence, something genuine still remains. And perhaps you have questioned yourself repeatedly because of it. Perhaps part of you keeps wondering whether you are reading too much into things. But deep emotional intuition rarely surfaces without reason. The human subconscious continuously perceives emotional truths hidden beneath visible behavior. Still, intuition must be balanced with wisdom. Do not romanticize emotional suffering without end. Do not become attached to emotional uncertainty simply because intensity feels significant. Some people remain trapped in painful dynamics because emotional unpredictability creates a psychological pull. The nervous system grows accustomed to emotional highs and lows. Calm love can initially feel unfamiliar or even hollow after chaotic attachment. This is why healing reshapes attraction. Emotionally healed people no longer pursue emotional confusion to feel alive. They begin valuing consistency, emotional safety, honesty, and inner peace. They stop reading emotional unavailability as depth. They stop attempting to earn love through suffering. And perhaps this entire experience is quietly guiding you toward that awareness as well. Because sometimes the universe does not send someone into your life simply to complete you. Sometimes it sends them to transform you, to elevate your standards, to deepen your emotional awareness, to show you that your heart deserves reciprocity rather than endless emotional guessing. At the same time, transformation takes time for everyone involved. If this person truly loves you, they may currently be fighting battles within themselves that nobody else can perceive. Battles between old wounds and emerging hope, between fear and longing, between self-protection and emotional surrender. And maybe right now, they are standing somewhere alone, replaying the sound of your voice in their mind, wondering whether it is still too late to reach for you honestly. The human heart carries regret more heavily than it carries rejection. Many people choose temporary emotional avoidance over vulnerability until the day they realize that silence itself became the reason they lost the person they loved. Do not underestimate how profoundly people can feel emotions they struggle to express outwardly. Some of the deepest love stories are buried beneath restrained behavior. Not because restraint is ideal, but because human beings are emotionally imperfect creatures, trying to outlast their own histories, while still longing to be loved fully. That is what makes love both beautiful and heartbreaking. Two wounded souls attempting to trust one another while carrying invisible emotional scars. Two nervous systems shaped by entirely different pain. Two inner children quietly asking the very same question, will you still remain once you truly see me? And perhaps that question rests at the very center of this connection too, because beneath pride, beneath silence, beneath fear, beneath emotional confusion, there is often simply a human being terrified of not being worthy of the person they love. People rarely admit this openly, but many emotionally withdrawn individuals secretly believe they will eventually let down the people they care about most. So they create emotional distance before abandonment can occur naturally. It is subconscious self-protection. If I remain emotionally guarded, losing them will feel less devastating. But love does not function that way. Guarded love still hurts. Silent love still aches. Suppressed emotions still leave marks. And eventually the soul grows exhausted from carrying feelings that were never honestly expressed. This is why emotional truth matters. Not performed emotion, not manipulation, not emotional dependency dressed as romance, real truth. The kind that quietly says, I am afraid but I care. I struggle emotionally but you matter to me. I do not fully understand myself yet, but the thought of losing you feels unbearable. Those are the kinds of emotionally honest moments that alter relationships permanently. And if this person reaches that emotional threshold, everything between you could be transformed. But until then, your task is not to lose yourself inside waiting. Continue healing, continue growing, continue becoming emotionally whole, regardless of what the outcome holds. Because your worth does not diminish simply because another person is struggling within themselves. You are not difficult to love. You are not too much. You are not emotionally unrealistic for wanting clarity, consistency, and emotional presence. Never allow emotionally wounded people to convince you that your needs are excessive simply because they are uncomfortable confronting intimacy. Healthy love may not always be flawless, but it should feel emotionally safe enough to breathe within. And one day, whether with this person or with another soul aligned with your emotional depth, you will experience a connection that no longer demands constant interpretation. A connection where affection is not perpetually concealed behind fear. A connection where emotional honesty replaces silence. A connection where two people stop pretending they are unaffected by each other. But perhaps before that future arrives, this present connection still has something meaningful left to offer both of you. Maybe reconciliation, maybe closure, maybe awakening, maybe courage. Only time reveals which. Still, do not dismiss the quiet truth. Your soul may already sense that somebody out there genuinely loves you. Not on the surface, not briefly, not casually, but deeply, inwardly, emotionally, perhaps imperfectly, but sincerely. And before you surrender completely, understand that human beings sometimes need time to become emotionally capable of expressing the love they already carry within. Healing is rarely swift. Emotional awakening rarely arrives cleanly. People often grow emotionally mature only after nearly losing what mattered most. That is the tragedy of human growth, but also its quiet beauty. Because sometimes, right when hope feels exhausted, people finally become honest with themselves. And perhaps, just perhaps, this story is not ending the way your fears keep suggesting. Maybe this silence is not love's ending. Maybe it is the difficult transformation that comes just before emotional truth finally surfaces. So tonight, before you persuade yourself you were never truly loved, remember this. Not every emotionally withdrawn person has forgotten you. Some are simply waging invisible wars between love and fear. And if your heart still feels connected to theirs in a way that logic cannot entirely account for, perhaps there is a reason for that feeling. Perhaps beneath all the confusion, two souls are still searching for the courage to meet each other honestly. Until then, protect your peace, but do not harden your heart. Remain emotionally wise without growing emotionally cold. Because the people who continue to believe in love after disappointment are often the ones who ultimately experience it most completely. And perhaps one day you will look back on this painful season, not as the moment love disappeared, but as the moment two wounded hearts slowly learned how to stop fleeing from it. If these words stir something deep within you tonight, hold on to that feeling. Somewhere inside your soul, you already know which connections are real. Thank you for sharing these moments here together. Heart to heart, thought to thought. And if this journey spoke to the quiet places within you that are rarely understood, stay close to this space. There are still many truths about love, healing, human psychology, and emotional awakening waiting ahead. Until next time, tend to your heart gently, and never underestimate how deeply you deserve to be loved.